Welcome to the Path to Wholeness, where we explore the intersections of spirituality and depth psychology. I am your host, Bethany Ward, and today I'm joined by Heather Berndt, a spiritual director, artist, and creator of Mappa Divina, a process that helps individuals listen to their soul's voice through creative expression. Today we're talking about the language of the soul and how it speaks to us through images. For both of us, the image of recovery moved us towards transformation. But this conversation goes beyond recovery into the broader ways that images show up in our lives, through dreams, archetypes, and symbols, and how they guide us into deeper understanding and growth. We'll also reflect on the wisdom of Meister Eckhart, who said, "When the soul wants to experience something, it throws out an image in front of her and then steps into it." What does it mean to follow these images? How can we work with them intentionally to hear the language of our own souls? And how can depth psychology and spiritual practices like spiritual direction help us to understand what our soul is asking us to step into? This is going to be an inspiring conversation, so settle in and let's explore how images guide the inner journey. Heather, thank you so much for being here. Let's start at the beginning. For both of us, the rooms of AA and Al-Anon were transformational spaces that our souls led us into. You and I have discussed that these experiences, we like to call them the images of recovery. How did this first image, this image of recovery, shape your journey into the inner work that you do now as a spiritual director?
Well, thank you, Bethany, for having me here. I'm excited. This is, the intersection, I think, of recovery and depth psychology and image making and image receiving it's just a really yummy space. Um, I tell people that my directees and people that are interested in how I got into kind of spiritual direction, I tell them that it really started with recovery. And the reason for that is that, I as somebody who sponsored a lot of people, it became pretty clear to me that what we were really talking about was, yes, addiction or addictive processes, but most of the time it really was about this journey with the divine, or in recovery, as we call it, a higher power. Um, People are kind of surprised sometimes, I think, when I say, the first step is really the only one that talks about the addiction or the substance or the person, and that the rest of them are really about our relationship with God, as we navigate and negotiate this thing called recovery. And after 20 years of that, of being in recovery myself in several programs and sponsoring, I knew there was a calling to be more present to this experience of, I guess, a type of spiritual formation work beyond the rooms. So that's how that experience has brought me to where I am today, or how we might say my soul has brought me to where I am today.
That, that's such inspirational language when you're talking about how your soul brought you to where you are today. And that's the essence of our conversation today. And I would echo that my experiences in the rooms of Al Anon were very similar. They were invitational and inspirational, where I went into the Al Anon space initially to be angry and to be a victim and to have this witnessing to my victimhood, only to discover that it was nothing like that. It was about vulnerability and connection and surrender and seeking. And when you shift into that space of vulnerability and surrender and connection, that's when you are transformed by this image of recovery that you and I are using. And once you experience that, you begin to live in the world differently. You begin to see the world differently, and you realize that there's a process of engaging the soul. and to know the language of it and to move with it is a unique way of being in the world.
Absolutely.
So we have this shared language around this image of recovery. And so you and I are using some different language than what is used in the rooms, but we're using it from both our reverence for depth psychology and our work as spiritual directors. So I want to deepen that and reflect on this image as a guidepost. Something spoke to us and something called us into that space of recovery. This idea of like the soul's first image and listening to the soul's first image. And this is where that quote from Meister Eckhart emerges for me, that when the soul wants to experience something, it throws out an image in front of her and steps into it. So how do you, as a spiritual director and an artist and a sponsor and someone in recovery, understand those words, this idea that the soul throws out an image and then steps into it?
Well, gosh, there's so much there. I think the soul has, to quote the Blues Brothers, right? It's on a mission from God. Um, and that it has a purpose, you know, of what Jung called individuation, which is this state of psychic integration, right? That facilitates, this balance, this psychic balance where we can experience wholeness and healing, um, where, our conscious mind and our unconscious self are communicating, and that there's this state of equilibrium. But, it requires a lived experience. It's not just a theory. And so, I think that the soul has us step into experiences in this embodied way to learn, to grow, and to understand it. It's like the big book of AA says, right? The spiritual life is not a theory. We do have to live it. And so I think throwing these images and experiences out in front of us for us to step into is a way of engaging and interacting and having this embodied conscious experience, and to integrate with, I think, kind of this unconscious drive or impulse towards living our fullest life, sharing our gifts. And, this does, as you know, with recovery, involves getting to play with our shadow, and those are all good things and challenging things.
What I'm so moved by what you're sharing is how proactive the soul is in our process of discovery and in our process of becoming. It is directly participating in everything that we are doing. And it is using elements like the shadow towards a divine purpose. It is moving us towards that wholeness, that fullest potential. And we can often think of the soul as something rather static. I'm this being that is a soul. But in the way that you're describing it, it's active, it's proactive, it's moving with us and it's prompting us into every journey we take.
Yes. Jung called some of the symbology that shows up in dreams as, this concept of kind of the forward striving function, that these images arise for us to move us forward, that there's this potential. And, with free will, we get to choose or not choose, but that the potential is there, the invitation is there, the guidance is there for our evolving self.
Yeah. And every soul has its own image. So you and I have found a shared language, a shared understanding when we discuss the image of recovery. But how our unique souls used that image of recovery is very different. It's the same, but it's different. And every soul uses its own language and its own images tailored to that individual's unique individuative process. And that's what we see in dreams. That's even what we see when we bring tools like tarot into the spiritual direction container. That one individual that's sitting in front of you is going to respond to an image very differently than the next one that you are serving in session. So there's this uniqueness to how the soul uses image, and I'm very moved by that. But maybe we pull back a little bit and pan out a little bit and look more deeply into the question of what is image as soul language. So what do you think makes these images so powerful and kind of define for us this image in the context that, define image for us in the context of spiritual work. It's not just visual symbol images, but it's symbols and it's archetypes and it's dreams. So what makes these images so powerful and what even are they?
Yeah, I think the soul has some heavy lifting to do to bypass our thinking mind. And one of the ways that it has to do that, I think, is through kind of this abstract way of communicating with us, and it kind of stops us in our tracks a little bit, which is necessary for us to stop and consider and engage, wonder, ponder, be delighted by. But it is a unique language that requires, I think about it kind of like looking out of the corner of your eye, kind of like, but it's also a place where, the left brain has to step aside and the ego self to, use the imagination and intuition to engage with it. You talked about like the personal and uniqueness of it, and the psyche has imagery that is, yeah, personal to us and based on, like our lived experiences and our cultural upbringing. But then there's also that level of archetypal imagery that arises, that is more shared. That's, right, the mythological realm, the narrative, the deeper, more archaic, ancient symbols. And all of those are unique to us. Some are shared, like this idea of, being somebody in recovery or the addict. But we get to have a personal dialect, I call it, and our own unique visual vocabulary that is ours and ours alone. But it requires engagement with it, and it's a practice, like a muscle. We learn how to have conversations with these images, how to be present to the mystery of them, to allow them to evolve over time. So it's a wisdom tradition in that way.
Yeah, oftentimes it moves us because it's meaningful and sentimental. But
Yes.
that grabbing, that's what I'm hearing in Meister Eckhart that's going to grab our attention and we're going to step into it. And it's going to be a method of discovery within that.
Yeah, and I was thinking, about walking into the room of recovery, crossing that threshold where life is never going to be the same again. And those huge shifts, psychic shifts for us, are indicative of those deep archetypal movements. There's before and there's after recovery, right? And, I was thinking too about the Fool card when I was thinking about this conversation with you, and some naivete when we walk into the rooms. I think the ego thinks I got this, and yet is very unaware of what is about to occur, the vastness, the sacrifice, the potential free fall into a bottomless pit of, you know, loss, grief. It can feel that way. And that, you know, the rooms do offer that container, that the 12 steps, the relationship with the sponsor, the rooms themselves are this scaffolding, this safe place to, you know, remember who we are. And the images of the people sitting around, you know, I was thinking how when I when I look at the face of somebody, it's this face staring back at me that is me, and how powerful that is. You know, it is a process that must take place in community.
You named the tarot card the Fool. And for those that are listening and are unaware, it's the very first card in the journey of the tarot, and it symbolizes new beginnings. And then as you expounded, I was really touched by thinking, symbol often offers us this sense of knowing that can't quite yet be articulated. It is this kind of initiation into you're getting ready to start a journey. And I know you can't quite articulate what that is, and you really don't know what's going to unfold, but I know that you know. I know that you sense this. And so this image is here to say, we're going to begin. And every image, not just the Fool, is like, okay, this is where we're going to begin this conversation.
Yeah, and you know, I think about, to touch on that, is this idea that oftentimes, and with visual image for sure, but even dream language and synchronicity, it's almost pre-language, um, in how the words aren't there, but once I engage with this image or experience, I am given the words. But it's not until, as Meister Eckhart says, you know, until I'm given that image before me to step into, that I start to have language and narrative to give meaning to, or describe, or even move me on to the next image. Um, and I love that about it. And I think that's where the imagination acts as a bridge, right? It requires us to have this sense of possibility and curiosity as a bridge between what is unconscious and what is desiring to be brought into consciousness.
What has been thrown out in front of you? What is the image that's been cast out? How is it unique to your soul language? And then how do we step into it?
Yeah, I often think, you know, that um, the liturgy of the spiritual direction session, you know, the movement is from the head into the heart, into that soul space, um, where that true guidance system is. You know, not to negate the role of our conscious self and the ego and its role, but that movement into nourishing and encouraging and cultivating that space for the directee to experience and trust their own knowing and their own sense of the divine, that is not mine, that is not yours, right? It's theirs. And that's such a beautiful process that, again, goes back to, you know, sponsoring, where, you know, so many people, they're tripped up with the higher power idea, or what is that, or naming it, or giving it a shape and a form. Um, and I think the rooms as group spiritual direction, the rooms of
Mhm.
recovery, I
Mhm.
I, I wouldn't have known that language early in my journey, but I certainly now see it that way. And it is a path of spiritual formation. Um,
Absolutely.
you know, and so there's, you know, I think of the symbol of the coin, and just some of the rich physical symbolism of being with people, and but also what arises for us in our own self-image as we move through the steps and we begin to live the life that we're invited into in its fullness.
Mhm. You continually use the word arise, and I'm thinking about spiritual direction and spiritual directors being the inviters to contemplate what arises. But then I also notice within my directees and within myself that sometimes it's hard to trust the unique images that arise for us. We sense they're arising. That's why we entered into the container. How do we trust that unique image that arises for us when it does arise for us?
Well, you know, I think it's okay to have permission to do it really poorly and messy
I'm
and
a master at
sloppy,
that. I did a great job
and
at doing it very
to
poorly.
doubt it and to wrestle with, I mean, I think that, yeah, is definitely part of the beauty of it, is that's how we learn to trust, is that practicing of it. And it's not a one and done deal, right? Like any of the steps. I mean, we don't work with an image or a symbol once and then we've got it figured out. These images do evolve over time. And I think that the lived experience, which, right, is kind of that mystical path, is about living it. Don't take my word for it. I mean, the Buddha said that. Carl Jung even said that, was like, I got Carl Jung's Red Book for Christmas.
Mhm.
So I've joined the club. I've drank the Kool-Aid.
Welcome. We are happy to
Yes.
have you here. Santa was very thoughtful.
Yes. Uh, but, even with that experience of Carl Jung's, where this was, very formative in his own experience of engaging with his soul in imagery and word, he said, this isn't going to be your experience. You can use my experience as a guide,
Mhm.
but you're going to have your own, and I hope you do. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so it feels to me like it really is that one day at a time, one step at a time, um, every day learning and being okay with not knowing. There is always a mystery element to this walk with the divine.
Mhm. I was just going to name the same thing. Jung himself would have resisted the moniker of the mystic, but there is an archetype of the mystic here. And we want to leave room for the mystery. As you said, the mystical archetype invites us to create space for mystery and to sit with the unknown. And that is where spiritual direction is different than any other therapeutic container. We're not fixing anything. We're wandering into, and we're letting those soul images unfold over time. That was a conversation I had in session with a directee just this morning. Like, I'm not the pattern maker. You're the pattern maker, but we need to listen to the soul's images unfold and discover the themes and discover the patterns as we continually step into the mystery over and over. So let's just let it not be known. Let's not answer this question right now. Let's let the image do it and wait for the next image to inform the first one. And I think this is where depth psychology and spiritual direction do serve each other so well, because we are we are helping others recognize and articulate their soul's language, but there's still a framework, that we're working within. And I encourage my directees to make their own red books. What is the soul image saying to you? What are you recording in your black books and uh, creating a compendium of in your red book? What is your conversation?
Yeah, I love that because it is a narrative tradition in a sense. A lot of people that, I see are verbal processors, and I'll say, you're just right. You're speaking your way into this knowing place. And I too invite them to explore what is your personal mythology, you know? And what does that look like? What are you dreaming about? Um, what kind of experiences are showing up that delight and that you're really curious about? In my practice, I consider it, I call it kind of multimodal. Um, I definitely am, trained traditionally in a contemplative tradition, and as somebody that also brings in a lot of Jungian tradition and depth psychology, I offer, we might work in kind of the spirit of the sand tray where they might tell me a story using little figurines. I might have them doodle or draw. We use embodied practices, of course, dream work. And as a director, I really believe that sometimes I think, are you the director or am I? In the sense of it's this shared experience, right? Much like the rooms. I mean, but that we are brought together. Um, if God is speaking to me in this way and guiding me in this way, as kind of, the clairs, right? The clairvoyance, or this is my clair, then I really believe the divine is going to bring into my spiritual direction space souls that are looking for that, right? That
Mm.
need that
Amen.
space. I have dreamers. I don't say we're going to talk about dreams or make it an agenda. They just show up,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I'm trained as a spiritual director, but I'm also trained as a psychic medium. And I will often invite an image myself. Either I will divine or be present to spirit prior to session or in the moments of silence at the beginning of a session. And I will just say, wherever you want me to guide or whatever you want your child sitting before me to step into, just show me. But I don't use the image until I see the opportunity. I will just hold that and listen for the door that image feels relevant to me. And without fail, every single session, there is that opening. And it's always the opening that we needed. Oh, I'm recalling, a stirring that I had from spirit. And does this feel relevant to you? Does this resonate with you? It is always the door that takes us where we need to go. And we were kind of talking about how do we trust what arises. That trust in the symbol that emerges for me to use in that container came through time and practice and consistency and being able to fall back and say, no, the spirit moved consistently and faithfully every single time. And I'm not interpreting the symbol, I'm offering it the same way I would offer anything in a spiritual direction session. And so we follow the symbol.
Yes. And I love that you said that. And I just want to name that, I feel so home with you, Bethany, in this experience of being a director who um, is connected in the way that we are. I have a very similar experience that I see people as a shape before they arrive. And it would just come to me. I would be preparing my space. I am preparing my space and clearing it. And I would see this shape. And I know enough to go, well, I don't know what that means, but I'm just going to hold it. And like you, most of the time, the person will start to describe that shape in any myriad of ways as a conflict. They might even take the shape sometimes with their bodies. And for me, it has only been just to hold it lightly. That's always for me. I'm like, just hold this image lightly that you've received. You don't know. God knows.
Mhm.
um, but just to allow it and to, as you said, kind of watch for that opening, watch for that symbol to emerge in their narrative and in their experience. And a lot of times I get really hot in my body as a way of knowing that spirit's really close during that time. But, we talk about the this knowing and this practice that we get to, and it requires a lot of spaciousness. Um, we do have to create space and quiet, that contemplative posture for our sensory system to slow down and engage. And I don't know why I get the images. I just know that I do.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like recovery. I don't know why I got sober. I don't know what that was
Mhm.
about, but I know it happened and I know it happened.
Mhm. Mhm.
And um, so yeah, I just want to reiterate, I'm delighted to hear you share that. Um,
Equally, yes, yes, and I just have to note that I'm also noticing that your earrings today look like planchettes, which is which is an image for me that, as you said, the spirit is near whenever I encounter that image, and it's for me the symbol of direct divine participation. And that is what I tell my directees in that space when that image emerges and I say, "May I please share what was given to me?" I always emphasize this is direct divine participation in your life, and you are so significant that this image is being offered to us for contemplation and to examine how it is in service to you and to continually reinforce that these are not just things that are capturing our attention, they have purpose, and that they are coming from a loving space that's just as curious about us as we are about it. And it is in the engagement that unfolds. And there are some practical ways that we can engage with symbol. We can bring that into our lives. It doesn't always have to be random. It often is random, but it doesn't have to be random. We can cultivate a space to be attentive to symbol. So I was hoping we could kind of look at some of the practical ways to engage the soul's language. So, one of the things that we've talked about are paying attention to dreams. We've talked about noticing recurring patterns. And you are also a soul collage facilitator. Do you want to briefly share with us how that might be a practical way to engage the soul's image?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier about, this idea of maybe image being pre-language. And I don't mean pre-verbal, like in the womb, but I just mean right before we have these words to articulate um, perhaps what we're experiencing. And soul collage uses um, images, just random. images from magazines, um, but you put together a collage that tends to have this same or similar energy, and it represents a part of you. Um, and so very focused is, on just a real specific aspect of your perhaps personality, or even maybe an archetypal energy moving through you. But you create the collage, and then using your intuition and your imagination, you engage with it in using a practice or a tool that Carl Jung developed called active imagination, where you are stepping into the image and having a conversation with it. And there's a process with some questions that you ask. And you're looking at, if this is a part of you that you have a relationship with, that, and this part is, a part of your soul, what might it want from you? What might you have to give this part of you? And as an energy, and it has a shadow side and a light side. So it's exploring these different aspects of what has, here I'm going to use this word again, but risen up or shown up. And sometimes we name it specifically, like perhaps this is my inner critic, or this is my high achiever. But the key to it is that we engage with it, we have a conversation with it, we embody it, and over time, its meaning may continue, to evolve. But now we have this picture and this language to engage with and have a relationship with this part of us. And I got certified in soul collage about 10 years ago, and I was fortunate to be certified by the woman who had created the process. Her name was Sina Frost. And so I have personally made, probably 50 cards. And the beautiful part of soul collage for me, and again, going kind of in relationship to recovery, was, it's not uncommon for people, right, in recovery to say, hey, hi, I'm Heather, and I'm a recovering alcoholic, or, addict, and that can become an image, a powerful image that we sometimes can't move beyond, or we see that as the core of who we are. Uh, and what I was able to see over time, creating these different images of these parts of my soul, is that, yes, that is a part of me. And it expresses itself in some different ways. But there's also all these other parts of me. And so it was a beautiful process, and continues to be, for me to see this fullness of who I am, and also to see and observe over time this evolution of who I am. And to have language for, and so there's kind of two sides to that, in that it can empower me having language for it, these aspects of me, and it can also disempower some of the images that are not helpful, to where I can say, oh, okay, it gives me this perspective.
Yeah, we can engage our multitudes, our dimensionality. I had it wasn't in the language of recovery, but I had something similar with shrinking myself down to my particular Enneagram type as a 4. I do this, so that's why I'm doing that, and then moving that and expanding that into soul collage and depth psychology and even astrology. It was like, okay, yeah, that's a part of me, and it informs, and I can have better access to shadow material, but I'm so much more. And my symbols and my soul language and my dreaming is so unique, and it's so beyond this framework. it invited me to fall in love with myself and all of my facets. And oh goodness, there's so much more. How silly that I limited myself to something so small. And I use the Enneagram frequently in my work. It's usually where I start with my directees. We want to identify selfhood, but then where can we go from there? What dimensions can we explore from there?
Yeah, sometimes I will create a collage or even specifically a soul collage very intentionally. And other times it is very much um, a much more open, just what is it that the soul, is wanting me to know? And trusting that what arises is ready to be engaged with and looked at, that it's safe to do so. Um, and sometimes when I have a particularly powerful dream, I will collage it and it just gives so much more insight. Or I might even draw the dream, just sketch it and look for yeah, interesting relationships of shapes or things that are, yeah, that I,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, perhaps couldn't see
Yeah,
any other way.
yeah, yeah. I'm thinking about a directee that is so moved by image and will see things on a walk or have an encounter with wildlife and um, has such enthusiasm with the symbol, and it's so moving and it's so inspiring. And I think that's what we're cultivating as spiritual directors to the best of our ability. Like, how are you falling in love with these symbols, and what aspects of the self does that then encourage you to fall in love with within yourself? And you have your own work. You have Mappa Divina. Can you share about Mappa Divina and the process and how it helps connect people with their soul voice through image making?
Yeah. So Mappa Divina came to me about 3 or 4 years ago. I had been, I am what might be called entering into this, second half or midlife or the midlife opportunity. Kind of coincided with COVID. I had been a graphic designer for about 15 years as a freelancer. And I had been noticing that it really was no longer feeding my soul in the way that it had. I felt a shift and a call, and I turned to vision boards as a way of perhaps articulating what is it that, as Eckhart said, what is this image that the soul wants to put before me? And I was having a hell of a time. I made no two or three and worked with them. And I realized just one afternoon, I thought, maybe I'm looking at this in not the best way for me. Maybe what I need to be looking at is, who do I need to be? So in a sense, rather than focusing on maybe this idea of having, what kind of a career will I have, or, what kind of things do I want in a consumerist way. And my vision boards weren't really like that, but I just couldn't get the image. And so I did some reverse engineering and I thought, well, what if it's not what I want? Because I can't seem to figure that out. But I trust that God knows. Maybe, I'll just focus on how God wants to guide me. And so I came up with this kind of three-part process of starting with, what is this archetype? What is the archetype right now in my life that is emerging? What is this new pattern? What is this new threshold? And then seeing that image, what are the values? What are the new guiding values? What matters? And so much of this has been around midlife, which is a huge threshold. And Carl Jung, of course, said, this second half of life is the inner journey. It is about this development and relationship with our imago Dei, the God within. And the Mappa part for me came from I have for years been going down to a monastery in southern Idaho, or I guess kind of mid Idaho, the monastery of St. Gertrude, which is a women's Benedictine monastery. So monastic wisdom, monastic traditions, Benedictine values have been another really important part of my spiritual formation. And monastics were often some of the earliest map makers. They were literate, they had the means, they were often the ones kind of creating, these images of where are we, what's out there, where are we located, and earliest maps were, of course, about where are we in relation to God. And so I liked the idea of this making of a divine map, but not so much about where we're going as much as where we're called to be. So to backtrack a little bit, yeah, the process involves, kind of identifying what is this emerging archetypal pattern at this threshold in my life of, for midlife, it's often very disorienting. It's very chaotic. A good tarot card for it is the Tower. We're called to, a lot of disruption and change, floods, the flood myth. And so we have this image that can at least give us kind of this sense of maybe the ground that we're on. And then we can visit our values. And, now that I kind of have a sense of perhaps what this image is of where I'm at, what is this compass? What are these guiding principles? What is my North Star? And then from there, moving into, okay, if I'm to be this person and I'm to use with these guiding principles, how am I to be in this world as I participate in the ongoing creation of God, right? So, there is this beginning, this creative beginning, and we are stepping into it. We step into it as spiritual directors. We step into it as creatives, stepping into a story, and it is a story of creation. So where am I if this is this emerging archetype, and using these, this North Star, and then from there moving into, okay, if I'm to be this person and I'm to use with these guiding principles, how am I to be in this world as I participate in the ongoing creation of God, right? So, there is this beginning, this creative beginning, and we are stepping into it. We step into it as spiritual directors. We step into it as creatives, stepping into a story, and it is a story of creation. So where am I if this is this emerging archetype, and using these, this North Star, what does life look like? And it's been very powerful for me. It kind of broke open some real barriers to this sense of meaning and purpose, and like all imagery, continues to evolve. I have it sitting on my altar. People that will that create a Mappa Divina, it's designed to kind of be this altar piece that you can engage with over time, allow to evolve, allow the images to continue to speak. Jesus never ran anywhere, and my directees don't like to hear that. But it is a slow process, right? This unfolding of the soul, this flowering of our calling. And it is the ultimate one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, being present to the divine in our lives.
Yeah, the invitation is to create an intentional way to live in relationship with soul imagery. And it sounds like that is some of the intention behind Mappa Divina. What is this unfolding map that you are traversing? And there's a consent that we engage with to follow the soul's invitations, without knowing where they'll lead. We have a map, and then I always say God loves a good divine paradox. We don't. And so we have a good sense of what the lay of the land is, but we're also discovering our own inner landscape again and again and again. So this is where we pay attention to what images are arising in our life all the time. Am I in relationship with the soul image? What are these images telling me? And to let both the pattern making and the intuition inform that as well. To bring in that logical pattern making process so I can kind of see the unfolding of this. This is making sense, but to leave all of that mystery within that divine paradox and let the intuition take us on that journey.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word consent, and one of the images that I will often present is this idea of the Annunciation, and that we are in this series of Annunciations, right? This cycle of Annunciations, and yeah, what is being planted and born anew in you? What is this new life that is being brought forth, and that along with that is what needs to die, right? And I think the soul is really good at the art of dying.
You must die daily. Yeah.
So yeah, symbolically, literally, you know the soul desires a good death, and that means living into our fullest potential with our gifts, and union with God. You talked about the mystic, or we talked about the mystic's way, and that is a key to individuation, right, as Carl Jung called it, which is this marriage, this divine marriage within. And this is one of the ways we get there. I say, image is a doorway. It's not the only way, but it is a doorway, and very powerful doorway, ancient doorway. Um, you know.
I do know. And this journey requires so much surrender and curiosity and vulnerability and trust. And all of those components are part of the living relationship with soul imagery.
Mhm.
I'm going to invite our listeners to consider what images are arising in their life right now, and to consider the ways that you can engage those images intentionally through creativity and journaling, seeking out a spiritual director, or just letting them be alive in you. Heather, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom about the soul's language and the power of imagery. I know I was very moved. And this conversation has been such a gift, and I know it will resonate deeply with those who have gathered with us. But before we wrap up, can you share where people can find you and connect with your work?
Yeah. Right now I have my website, which is heatherberndt.com, under construction as we speak, but it's a way to get in touch with me. And I will, for those of you kind of in the Washington area, I am the state of Washington. I will be having a Mappa Divina workshop at the Monastery of St. Gertrude over the summer solstice. So if you're interested, that will be out on my website. It is out there now, but the registration won't open for a little bit. But
that is very enticing to make a trek out to Washington, all the way from this side of the states. Thank you, Heather, and to everyone listening, thank you for joining us.
yes.
If this conversation sparked something for you, I encourage you to pay attention to the images that are showing up in your life right now, whether in dreams, symbols, or even moments that just feel meaningful. These may be your soul's way of guiding you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe to the Path to Wholeness, share it with a friend, and leave a review. It means so much and helps me continue bringing you meaningful conversations like this one. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Bethany.